and thank you for joining me here on Sew Stitch Hex. I'm Miss Izzy, and today was a great day. I was at the Charlotte Pride Parade, and it was hot. It was very hot. So today I'm going to be doing a review on a book in my segment, Bibliofancy. The book of choice today is Hoodoo, Honey, and Sugar Spells. So this book by Deacon Millett is a hoodoo tradition, and this one, they did a pretty good job, I think, with this book. Now, it is the more positive side of hoodoo, so it doesn't talk about like curse jars, vinegar jars, doesn't talk about anything negative, although I think there's a brief mention. There is one thing that I absolutely adore about this book, and that's its frequently asked questions section, which is extensive. Like, it goes from, let me see. It goes from page 42 until the end of the book on page 96, which I think is lovely. It comes from their online forum, which I haven't actually visited, but they do list their main professional members of their online system, and several of them my high priestess knows personally, so that was pretty cool. Or no, I wouldn't say personally, but she knows them and she's met them, or she knows of them and their work. So I'm going to say personally because it's personal to her. Also, it has a really funny thing with some of the frequently asked questions. It points out that a lot of people really have no idea what they're doing. Like, there's this one person who was like, oh no, the candle went out and I had to restart the entire spell all over. Like, no. Calm down. No. Like I've said before in other videos, you don't have to start over. Sometimes you just light it and keep going. Like, nature's going to blow it out. Timing's going to happen. Things are going to happen. It's not ruined because it went out. Like, just relight it. That's why you have the light in the first place. It's not just going to stay lit. For people who didn't know that you couldn't leave candles unattended, this whole lecture I had before comes from questions that are in here that's like, you don't understand basic fire safety. And I mean, I'm not trying to laugh at them, but it hurts me to read, to see that. And that's one of the things they talk about in here. Another interesting concept that they bring up in here is how older traditions, which can still be very relevant today, but I find distasteful, even if they are relevant and can work for some people, are using the color of the target's skin to incorporate into the type of sugar that you use for the spell. So say you were working on in here the woman referenced having to assist someone with her white baby, so she used confectioner's sugar, the super powdered sugar. Because it's so white and soft and light, it helped to represent the baby and helped to ease the baby's issues. Because the baby, I believe, I can't remember exactly. I feel like it was having some behavioral issue that had something to do with probably colic. I don't remember exactly, but that's a good guess for me. But they use that to help with them. Say if they had a darker skin tone, you would use like a brown sugar or something like that, or maybe sifting like other things into the sugar. And I was like, that's an interesting concept. I don't like it because of the focus on the physical vessel, and I find it more important to focus on the spiritual part of a person and the essence you get from that person, being their personality and their spirit, the aura or the energy that you feel from them. Because although I don't generally see the aura, I'll feel it in a way that I can comprehend as this is that exactly. But it's in a words that just like filter it through and know what it is. And I feel that essence being represented in a physical form versus their physical form being represented physically in a spell would be more important, because the physical vessel is a temporary vessel, and if you're trying to do something intent on that individual, I would do something more potent to that individual, not to their physical body, since it can technically change. But that's just my preference, something I noted, and this isn't a practice that not everyone does. And even though this, the Curio Craft and Conjure, who sponsors this book, also has a book on petition papers, they do a really good job of explaining petition papers and also explaining the basic history of hoodoo and conjure and what it is and what it isn't. And I actually really enjoyed their shortened history that they provided. It was actually very relevant, and it gave a lot of details in just a short amount of pages. Like, I believe there was only like 3 pages, and it worked out really well. Another piece that I really enjoyed from this text is the description of like the jars and like where to put them. Like how they mentioned, like you put your honey jar, put it in hidden in plain sight. So like that thing that's very obvious, like it can be magical. It's your sugar jar. It's right there in front of your face, but you don't think about it. And I really like that they mention that, because yes, that's something you would do, but is it something that you would tell someone you do, or mention, hey, you should do this? Like, it seems so obvious that why wouldn't you tell someone? And obviously a lot of the people who've been doing these practices don't know, because they didn't even mention. And that's something to mention in here, because this is hoodoo. They do not really work with the Loa, or at least in this book they do not reference work with the Loa. And maybe it's perhaps because it's more of a tradition you would keep less public and more hush-hush. But there is mention of one saint. I'm pretty sure they work with just Saint Expedite. I think they mentioned Saint Anthony. And then there is a reference briefly to 1 or 2 spells that use either the name of the Lord or Jesus in them, which I found very interesting, that they even, like, knowing how intensely hoodoo is linked to, like, the Psalms, the Book of Solomon, all the like the several books that are really important, those being the ones that I see most often in the work that I do. I found it interesting that they tried their hardest to exclude talking about the Christian God and the different saints that you can work with in the path. I found it interesting that they put so little in there. I guess it was to prevent people from being scared. And I just thought that was cool. Like, oh, okay. We're just going to leave out a lot. But a lot of this book here is cooking, which a lot of hoodoo is basically cooking with intent. Hoodoo is just, I'm hungry, but I have magic to do, so we're going to combine the two. And I really love this one. Although there is one recipe that I do not want to find, because it is horrific to me, but it is it's called Kiss Me Now balls, and it does something which other paths do, and lots of paths find a way to incorporate, which is when you include personal concerns into your edible spell craft. So like here they incorporated what would be sexual fluids, I guess, being listed that you can use either male or female ejaculate, or using female menstrual blood in the spell, which I thought was just horrific, because the recipe can make 4 dozen of the Kiss Me Now balls, which people comment about like how they felt about them, so that means people ate them, which means someone ate it, which yes, I know people do this, other paths do this, but I have so many issues with so many things that freaks me out. I mean, yes, technically I believe it would be sanitary by having been put through the oven and been put at such a high temperature, provided you did cook it thoroughly as you should, but I'm still horrified, and I would probably opt out of personal concerns, because I don't want to put my hair in something, and no way in heck I'm using any like fluids of any sort. Like, no, not gonna touch it with an 89.5 foot bowl. No, not at all. But that was included, and because that is thing in the path, it was cool, it was included. They'll include that, but they won't talk about the saints very much. Solid. But yeah. So, another thing that I thought was very interesting was how they briefly mentioned kind of a Neo-Wiccan idea that it's all about visualization, which I know several witch channels here on YouTube do talk about, where visualization can be the most important thing you do. If you can't have all the things, if you can't have the athame, if you can't have the fancy altar, if you can't have all the candles to do all the physical spell work, intent and visualization being your key thing, which I personally don't work well with visualization. You can use visualization in many things. You can use it to cleanse your home by imagining a white light starting at your center and spreading out. I'm not good with that. I like physical objects to be tied to that protective instance, and I know some people who use shark teeth. I know some people who draw sigils all around their home, and their home is just a work of art. I love sigils. But some people need that physical object, and I need that physical object, and so does Hoodoo. It's not Hoodoo if you don't have that physical thing. You have to light the candle. You can't just imagine the flame. You have to actually take that time. And another thing that they mention in here, that'll be the last thing I really talk about, is that they talked about basically having a to-go altar setup, which I thought was precious. I absolutely adore it. The one they talked about is having like a small tin can, kind of like you would have like Altoids, like the cute little ones, which are great for mini altars, just like they're great for giving gifts because they're reusable and they're just so precious and they're super cheap. You just buy the candy, eat the candy, and then use them. Perfect. Or you can just give them the candy and the box, and then they get candy, and candy's great, and that's the purpose here. Sweeten people to you. Make people sweet to you. But the altar that they did was packing tiny candles, which you can use something as small as birthday candles because you're on the go, and a mint or a butterscotch candy or a cinnamon candy if you need to spice things up and sweeten them. The peppermint if you want it to be refreshing, and just butterscotch. I think it's really sweet. I love those. Those are the best. But use those in the honey jars. You can use candy, and they even mentioned briefly using candy like the little fireball hot things, little hot candies. Using those instead to spice something up because it is a candy, but it still adds that spice if you don't want to use like a cinnamon. Or in here mentioning using the one recipe they had, which was a sauteed onions and apple kind of stew, kind of cake thing. The way they described it, it sounded like Mrs. Mooney's meat pies, but with apples instead of people. And sounds fun. Sounds great. Love it. It was to sweeten people who need that extra bite of like the onion because they're not sweetening up to you, or they just seem to need a little extra help. And I thought that was lovely, especially because I adore onions. I don't like apples. Not at all. Don't trust them. Don't like them. They don't taste. I can't chew very well. Not a great combo. But great spell and great way to incorporate candies and other things into it. Mentioning that like sweets don't have to be just sugar. They don't have to be just honey. Although honey being a natural sweetener, being practically immortal, not expiring, and being just perfect for this. Talk about sweetening people up, and I really enjoyed how they use so many different sweets, which they mentioned in like using little sugar packets in the mini altar, using all these other things that you can just basically find miniature versions of to put in there. Like you don't have to pour just straight sugar. You can use little sugar packets, like from work. If you need to sweeten the people from work, now they recommended taking packets from work, sifting them with sugar and then bringing them back to help sweeten your coworkers to you so you're in an office setting. But I found this unsanitary because I wouldn't like to think that someone is taking the sugar packets home, utilizing them in witchcraft, and then taking them back, even if it is the intent to affect the person using them. I'd like to think that food safety, you are not taking these things and then taking them back. Maybe keeping them for intent, but don't be taking it just from work. Just taking it from work. Why? I don't like it, but that is using those little tiny packets like you get at like Starbucks for like the natural honey and the natural cane sugar. Those in the tiny altars, tiny to go. So thinking small, thinking things that are already prepackaged and that aren't loose, they can go in these tiny little boxes. And I really like their description, as long as it went on in like other mentions, because they didn't have some things, which I do find to be a negative in this book, is that some things could have been put into the same section, but because they were in the frequently asked questions, were spread out throughout the book. So like one thing that talked about this and that was mentioned over here aren't together because they were mentioned in different Q&As. And that was the thing that I noticed, which is why the miniature altars had so many like subparts, because there's so many things that can go into that section that were not combined. But overall, I absolutely adore this book. I love the idea of sweetening people to you, and knowing me and my crippling addiction to sugar and sweets and pastries, I find this to be absolutely fabulous. So I hope you want to read it. It's super cute, and it has little bees on the cover. And that just makes it precious. But if you like honey, you like sweets, you want to learn some hoodoo, I recommend you do read this book. Alright, thank you for joining me in Bibliomancy on Sew Stitch Hex. I hope to see you and cast a spell with you in the next video.